Hi, everybody. Joe Marion back again. Want to talk today? We're going to talk, or now we're going to talk about ITAD certifications a little bit. More and more IT resellers are being defined as IT asset disposition companies, or ITADs, and it's being driven by legislation and regulations and enterprise requirements. And there are two companies that we have with us today. Steve Mellons from ADISA and Roger Greive from R2, or really SERI is the company's name. These are two of the world leading certifying companies. Steve Mellons, ADISA, is a UK based certifying company. R2 is based in the US, has installations, about 1,000 R2 installations around the world. And we're really honored to have you guys here with us today, kind of give a little talk about what's going on in ITAD certification. So I'll let you gentlemen take it away.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, ASCDI. I'll take it as a compliment to be viewed alongside the SERI R2 certification, because you've got 1,000 sites worldwide, so far more expansive than we are. For those on the call, just to introduce myself, ADISA, Joe's right, we're UK based. Most of our certifications are held in the UK. We are recognised by the data regulator in the UK as a UK GDPR certification scheme. We'll talk about that in a second. And we're just in the process of getting EU recognised through our Irish office. But Roger, for those who may not be familiar, I'm sure they are, maybe you can just introduce SERI and the R2v3 quickly.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Steve. SERI is a nonprofit organization in charge with administration of the R2 standard for electronics reuse and recycling. And as Joe very kindly mentioned, we're about 1,000 facilities around the world, 37 different countries at this point. And that presents both the opportunity and the challenge for us to continue providing the accurate information so that companies can become certified and add to their own benefits, which Steve and I will be discussing over the next few minutes. It's nice to be here, and we're happy to be one of the sponsors of this event, and look forward to our chat. So, Steve, this is your turf. I'm in America, early morning for me, so you just take it for a while.
I think the one thing that we want to probably start with is certifications. Two certification bodies, do we compete with each other? You know, are we enemies, etc., etc.? And I think I'll flatly answer that with a no, we're not enemies. I saw Andreas's piece earlier on and talking about ISO standards and things like that. So it might be worthwhile perhaps us framing the certification landscape, Roger, slightly different than we did yesterday, just so that we can highlight perhaps there is synergy between R2 and ADISA, where we're strong and where we're weak. I'm quite happy to talk about that. But also to talk about maybe some of the ISO standards and some of the benefits they give, but also some of the weaknesses if applied incorrectly. So the bit that I would perhaps like to leverage, and you said that it's my turf, Europe, as far as I'm concerned, we are still in Europe, despite what happened a couple of years ago. ADISA's taken a view that what we want to become from a certification is that we're specializing in the compliance piece and the data piece. So we're very, very niche. We look at the interface the industry has with the customer, and we make sure that is compliant with law. And that's the efforts that we've been doing, getting recognized as under Article 42 as a GDPR certification scheme. And that, to pick up on Andreas's piece earlier on, that takes away the headache of compliance for your customers, because the regulators are pre-approving a certification, which is hugely beneficial for them, and it's a huge part of your value proposition when you're selling a service. And so we're very much at ADISA very much focused on, you know, risk to the data, risk to the physical asset, compliance with law, and very much focused on that interface of the service offering to your customers. But with R2, it's a far more expansive. There's much more to the R2 certification than within ADISA. Roger, maybe you can frame the size of the certification which R2 covers.
Sure, be glad to. As Steve mentioned, and I think Andreas set it up perfectly this morning, and we thank him for that overall introduction to the landscape we operate in. R2 was designed starting in the around 2006, 2008 with a challenge from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the initial version of R2 was more about recycling. But as the industry has progressed, R2 has followed that progression over the three versions. We have to have increased vigilance over the reuse and the market that interacts between recycling and reuse and repair. And then the very important aspect of data security elements, and this is where we overlap. We're sort of adjacent to the ADISA standard. There's a lot of overlap, and we applaud the ADISA standard for their thought through this process. But the R2 standard is designed to be more inclusive for all of operations of a facility, an ITAD or a recycler. The point of R2 is that it is outcomes based. We strive for helping companies adopt best practices in a number of areas of sorting, of testing, materials recovery, data security, things like that. So it's not for everybody, and it's not easy, but it is good to have. And we'll talk more about the actual benefits later. But that's where R2 is in the world of this business.
And I think just to expand on, we're here to talk about ITAD certification. I know the ASCDI scheme recognizes lots of different standards worldwide, NAID, e-Stewards, Wheelabex, I think, as well. It's my view that, not wishing to put a sales pitch on sort of industry specific standards, but when you're comparing some of the ISOs, ISO 27001, internationally recognized standard for data security, but it can be scoped. And it can be scoped onto part of your business or a subset of your business, whereas an industry-specific certification, it's very difficult to hide from the ITAD process, if you like. It's the fundamental of why these industry standards exist. And I think, if we're talking certifications, again, Andreas, to name drop again, talked about a good starting point is 9001 for me. If you're looking to get certified, I'd look at the quality management system perspective first, put some really good foundations into your business of ensuring that you've got processes and procedures that can be replicated, therefore the outcomes can be assured. And that for me is 101. And I think within the R2 certification, you look throughout their systems for repeatable processes. Is that correct, Roger?
Yes. That's it. Through the combination of documentation, training, record keeping, things like that. The entire thing is built on management systems.
And I think, again, and this is where an industry certification like R2 and ADISA as well is slightly different than the ISOs, because if you look at the outcomes which we're trying to achieve, certainly from our perspective, it's data sanitization. We want to make sure that there's no data which is left at the end of a sanitization technique, but also that the data bearing assets up until it's the sanitization is applied to it are secured throughout the process, chain of custody, physical security, etc., etc. And I think that's where we differ as industry standards from some of the ISOs, because they won't necessarily look at that level of detail. And certainly when you're looking at the auditing bodies behind some of the ISOs, we've seen internationally different quality auditing going on. So whilst the badge may be the same, the means of getting that badge has been different, and therefore the confidence customers have in some of those certifications may not necessarily be well placed. Whereas sort of third party auditing, which is ourselves, we audit our own standard. We're a UCAS accredited auditing company. We make sure that the outcomes are the same. And I know you're ANSI as well, Roger, I think, which is the equivalent in the US. So all of the auditing is done under an accredited environment. And that's where the outcomes can be assured. And I think, again, picking up on Andreas, and I'll lead it into a discussion with yourself, Roger, on the benefits. What we're seeing in the UK is that we're seeing organizations looking at retired assets and looking at the opportunity which they afford them, whether that's financial recovery or whether that's philanthropy, so donation, social impact and things like that. And they're becoming a little bit more in tune that a piece of old equipment has potential for them. It's potential to do good, but it also has potential to do bad if handled incorrectly. And this is where I think certifications come in, because they'll be looking for assurance that the bad aspect of asset recovery doesn't actually happen for them. And that could be a data breach. It could be brand erosion. It could just be an embarrassment caused by an asset tag, for example, being left on a device that's found in landfill. And I think that's where we see at ADISA certification strength is the external benefit which organizations who are certified to the standard are able to show their customers where data security is concerned. If you were to pitch R2, let's not be shy of pitching a little bit. What are the benefits externally, internally, do you think, from certification?
That's just it. There are benefits going both directions for a company that has any professional certification like ADISA or R2. The internal benefit is that of using a management system combined with the specific R2 requirements to collect and codify the internal operations that a facility has, so that there is documented training, and the processes are recorded, the results are recorded, there's monitoring and measurement, all those things that go on that make a company better. So by having a certification and by going through that process, again, not the easiest process in the world, but certainly not the most difficult. But going through the process of becoming certified will improve a company internally significantly. They can grow, they can add employees by not dreaming up new stuff all the time because there's a process in place to do so. They can monitor their own problems and correct those problems because there's a process in place for that. So there's a bunch of advantages internally to a company to be certified. Externally, the advantage is this company can announce to the world that they've been adjudicated by an impartial professional body, and that body, trained in this process, has said, yes, this company meets all of these requirements in many areas. The requirements including environmental protection, worker health and safety, protection of the communities is served by the company, their clients, their employees, data security issues. All those things are then projected outbound to say this company is good at all this stuff. So that's the external advantage that balances the internal.
I think I'm going to join in on the internal piece now, because we got UCAS accredited, UK Accreditation Service, so ISO 17065. We've been auditing for 10 plus years, but we've only got accredited in the last 18 months. And the internal benefit that we've received from that certification ourselves, or accreditation, is because it's the official accreditor, is hugely beneficial to us as a business. Our processes and procedures now enable us to add other standards in. We're just adding 9001 to our portfolio. We've got a legal standard, another GDPR certification scheme coming in. So we've got about 9 different standards that we're auditing against. And our processes now are really embedded thanks to certification. So I'm a huge fan of it. I shied away from it, but I firmly believe by being certified to 17065, which is different than this industry, of course, it's benefited my business. So I think the internal benefits are really underrated. By getting certified, people think about how's it going to help? Well, the external side we'll talk about in a second. Internally, it makes your business better, I think, because the processes and procedures are current best practice. And therefore, it gives you the ability to scale, gives you ability, as you say, to bring new people in, because there's already existing mature process in place and systems in place, so that you don't have that seesaw, if you like, of quality that you may suffer from.
The things that are more subtle, like if you choose to add a new service, a new product line, most companies have a management of change process built into their system so that they can just go through that process rather than flailing about and trying to decide what to do next. It's incredibly helpful for a company to have these tools as their foundation. And I would like to add just really briefly, with these management systems as a foundation and our specific certifications on top of that as a very important middle layer, ADISA, R2, the rest of them. On top of that is the ASCDI certification, in which these companies, once certified to these various other certifications, then take a pledge for ethical behavior and are evaluated by their peers. So that 3-layer process it seems to be a really helpful development in our industry to include the ASCDI certification on top of ours.
I think ethics is I know we chatted just before as well, Roger, some of the frustrations that we see. ADISA has a lab, so we test products as well. So we test data sanitization products worldwide. And some of our frustrations are that we only test the product itself. So we certify the product, not the company. And what we see is that we see some companies who we certify their products making claims about their products that are not strictly correct. And we have no grounds, no justification to do anything about it. I think where ASCDI's scheme is concerned, I think the ethics is really strong. Certification can only tell part of the story. But if you look at how an organization conducts its business, its reputation, how it works with others, I think that's equally strong as well. And I think it is a very powerful add-on to the core certifications held. If I may, let's just go on and segue a little bit into external benefits and looking at the customer. I've always said for 12, 15 years now that we want intelligent customers. We want customers asking difficult questions, because that means that they understand that the risk to data or the challenges associated with the service that you offer. Service being a key word. The industry grew up facilitating a transaction. We'll get rid of old stuff. Whereas now I see a move globally, much more to selling a service, and that means building value. I think one of the external benefits of certification is to add that into your value proposition. So yes, we're a good business. Yes, we do what we say we're going to do, but we're being independently verified that is compliant with a piece of with a standard piece of written prose, which is for ADISA, we're compliant with the law because it's a GDPR certification scheme. And for R2, you're compliant with a whole range of other risks associated with the transaction, from material management through to the reuse piece. And I really think the new, and I've got it here to my left-hand side this time, I think the reuse piece within R2v3 is really, really strong. Are you seeing a lot of take-up for certification from companies who are maybe traditionally brokerage?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, that is true. Yeah, a lot of companies have evolved from a materials recovery orientation, or strictly recycling, into more reuse and ITAD functions, ITAD services, and now getting into ESG services and things like that, which we'll discuss in a few minutes. So there's a process evolution that's been going on for the entire time that R2 has been an available standard. It's also interesting to note that within R2, you mentioned 27001 being subject to scoping issues. We can do the same thing with R2. The new version, R2v3, calls for a certain set of core requirements to which every facility has to be certified. But then there are 6 process requirements in addition, and a company can choose which of these 6 they choose to become certified to. The 7th, by the way, is in process right now for photovoltaic modules and the processing and recovery and reuse of those. So a company that doesn't have any interest in, for instance, materials recovery would not be certified to the materials recovery area or to the brokerage area, but they might be interested more in the testing and reuse area and the data sanitization area, in which case they would be certified to those appendices. So we designed it with some flexibility so companies can choose what activities they choose to do, and then once they are certified, those companies are listed in our directory as having those specific elements to their certification.
I think that's really important. Again, if you look at, I'm not sure ITAD is the right term anymore, to be honest, because the industry itself is evolving and expanding and becoming much more, in my personal opinion. And I think if we're talking about circularity and ESG, if you think of sustainable IT, the extension of the product lifecycle is a key part of that. Embodied CO2. From a reporting perspective, I don't think it's there yet, by the way. I'd be interested to see whether my belief is correct or not. But I believe that CO2 has to be reported by the first user. You can't actually get a credit. I think people are, but I'm not sure that's the official way of reporting. It'd be interesting to explore that.
Yeah, this is where Reich Sandlin is really good. He's presenting later on this afternoon, and I'd highly suggest attending that session. He can get into Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, for the ESG reporting, environmental, social, and governance reporting. So it is a little complicated, but once we settle into it, it'll become commonplace once it gets going a little bit more.
I think, again, picking up on Andreas's piece early on about the role of ITAD and certification, because I'm talking about the reuse piece here, is that when the reporting mechanism for Scope 3 is corrected, because I think it is incorrect at the moment, there will be a huge benefit for organizations to allow products to be reused. ITAD is that mechanism, to recover safely sanitized media, and then to prepare for the next user and give a good next user experience. And I think this is where certifications are key, in my opinion. From a data perspective, clearly we've got compliance done pretty well with the official approval against GDPR, the overarching piece of legislation. But we also have a laboratory, and I know we chatted about this as well, where sanitization is getting more and more challenging. Quirky firmware is making command sets unreliable, perhaps, but we're also seeing the way that media is actually implemented into architecture, so embedded onto boards, and it's becoming much more challenging to actually use traditional overwriting techniques, which is why the selection of a sanitization vendor for an ITAD is really, really key. Cheap is not always best, we find, because you may be getting a lower yield because it will just fail. And so this is where we see additional complexities in the industry, which some view as a problem. I think that's a powerful piece of value that you're offering, because if you can overcome those challenges for your customers, increase their financial return, decrease their risk, you're now a strategic, valuable partner for them. And I think this is really important where the evolution of ITAD is concerned. And I think that's where certifications can help, because people say, I don't know what to do. Well, guess what? 90% of your issues are resolved through certification, because it's current best practice, and the certification bodies are out there learning what's coming down the line, and future-proofing and evolving as well themselves.
Exactly. There's a line from Lewis Carroll comes to mind. It takes all the running you can do to stay in one place. We're trying our best to keep up with these technological developments for the plethora of devices that now contain data, some of them almost invisible, the Internet of Things, and all those various elements that all pull together, that create a puzzle for an ITAD provider. How best to sanitize a device, to prove that sanitization, to verify that it actually does not have any original data on it, things like that. There are ways of doing it. And it's new solutions being developed all the time, and it's up to us. Your laboratory is a wonderful tool to have that, to be able to actually test these things. We don't have one of those. We do have the ability to adjust our standards somewhat. We issued a formal interpretation of the standard that allowed for software being interpreted as some of the processes employed by these companies to verify that software has been sanitized, or data has been sanitized. So it's a constantly evolving environment that we are keeping up with, but it takes our full attention.
And that's, I mean, we're here to talk specifically certifications. I always like to go off on a tangent a little bit, but I won't. And this is one of the benefits, which you say, we've been chatting together now for only 4 or 5 weeks. And we're just looking at some of the things that you're seeing in the sector, and some of the challenges that you're seeing, some of the challenges that we're seeing. And that means that together, the certification bodies can actually go away and start doing some of the work behind the scenes to make the industry not have to do that themselves. And this is one of the things that I think is really important to convey about certification, is it is hugely beneficial to become part of a community. ASCDI are doing a great job in this. This is the second of 3 sessions globally that they're running to try and get the community to see that it's not necessarily about what's in it for me, but it's about what's in it for us as a collective view on it. And I think if we can, as certification bodies, I know we've chatted about working together, if we can view certification not as it's us or them, but actual fact as the sum of our greatest strengths, it becomes much more valuable, I think, to organizations.
Oh, definitely. That's something that we deal with all the time. And as these new technological developments emerge, or new products emerge, how do we communicate that accurately to both the R2 facilities that will choose whether to use them or not, but also to the network of auditors that need to evaluate these companies, as without playing some sort of gotcha game. I know about this software and you don't, therefore it's a non-conformance. That's not the way it works. So we're trying to inform both sides equally and let them then work it out as to whether or not they are in conformance with the given requirement. The idea of auditors being partners in a way, pointing toward continual improvement from the facilities, rather than the enemy that glides in on a given morning and starts finding things that are wrong. It's a different mindset. And the first time people are audited, they're terrified. It's classic. But after a while, it becomes a shared venture between auditor and auditee.
And let's explore that because we touched on it yesterday, actually, and I think it was a really good point. My experience is going to go in getting 17065. The first audit we had, which would be this time last year, actually, it was terrifying. You know, we're an auditing company, but it was terrifying to be audited because it's almost the state of unknown. However, once you go through it and you go, well, we're actually pretty good. We meet that. Business as usual meets those requirements. Then any audit that you subsequently do a little bit of prep for it, but actual fact, you open your doors and say to the team who come in, fill your boots. You know, you'll see us as we are, and we're compliant, we believe. We only had 8 findings at our last audit, one of which was that I didn't have a job description myself. So as the founder, I didn't think I need to, but they corrected me on that. And I think this is an error, a fallacy with certifications, that you can bolt them onto your business.
Yes, yes.
I don't believe that's the right strategy. I think certifications, to make them work for you, regardless of whether it's 9,000, 27,000 or anything, they need to be embedded into your business processes. And therefore, the first time is, have we embedded them correctly? That's the fear. The second time is, yeah, we're pretty good. Third time is business as usual is compliant. And that means it's not a cumbersome undertaking to become certified. And then you get the value, the external value that we talked about to customers, the assurance, the internal value that we can do more and repeat our processes. Is there any certification mistakes that you see in your experience, Roger, that perhaps is worth sharing with the audience?
There's a couple. One of them is the incomplete examination of all legal requirements that might apply to a facility. It takes a bit to do that, to do some Google searches or subscriptions to bulletins that come out about this topic. But for a company to know what regulations actually apply to them and what don't is a stumbling block for many, because it's one of those things you never know quite when you're finished. There's always something else to be checked. And if an auditor knows more about it than an auditee, then there's an imbalance there. So the companies being audited need to do some preparation to do that. There's consultants that can help. There's websites that you can subscribe to, things like that. So that's one area that seems to be of concern. Another, the obvious one is about the data sanitization process, and is it thorough? Can it be verified? Things like that. So they change over time.
And I think that's the key bit again to draw out about certification, is that it is evolving. There's changes coming down the line within Europe, certainly. Stockholm Convention with the persistent organic pollutants and the checks that are associated with that, and each country seems to be implementing those differently. I know over here in the UK Environment Agency is implementing it different than the Scottish Environment Agency, which is causing organisations some concern.
Yeah.
You know, as a certification body, it's you know, our roles, I guess, is to draw the line at a sensible level and provide consistent and sensible pragmatic advice to meet those type of changing requirements. Or in the case of a couple of things, to agree not to and to lobby, because we don't have to just accept a ruling, if you like, if it's fundamentally wrong. And that's what we're currently doing in the UK where POPs is concerned. Just aware of time, Roger, let's just touch base a little bit on what we think. And I know the first session was the ITAD community today, I'm paraphrasing. What do you think the opportunity for ITAD is, not just US, but globally? And where do you think certification can sit in to help them seize that opportunity?
A lot of our work lately has been on the integration of sustainability issues into the overall ITAD process. ITAD itself is perhaps a little bit exclusionary, in which the D is about disposition, when a lot of conversations are about ITAM instead, information technology asset management, and the entire management over the entire process, rather than just the disposition aspect. For our business, it's traditional to call it ITAD, and we've continued doing so. But the larger concerns for how it integrates with for instance, facilities purchasing devices with a longer lifespan or a different warranty structure or things like that, goes all the way back to that. Beyond that, manufacturers can be looking at their own repairability issues or sustainability of materials. That goes even one step further back. out of the range of ITAD companies. So sustainability is a big deal. The idea that when a laptop is manufactured, this was brought up yesterday by Claire in her excellent presentation. Very close to 80% of the total carbon impact comes from the manufacturing of that device. So you've used up 80% of the carbon before you take it out of the box. From there on, if you can reuse it and extend the life of it, you are delaying or perhaps canceling the manufacture of a new device. So that 80% is thus carbon saved. So it's one of those things that we'd urge companies to consider as they deal with their own clients, to talk about redeployment of devices or taking devices in, repairing them, sanitizing them, and then sending them back to the original client. Things like that to encourage the longer use of these devices, keeping in mind that there's a partial financial concern for some recovery of value, but there's other things in play as well, especially with the ESG reporting that is increasingly required.
It is interesting, you know, as a cheerleader, I always call myself, because you don't actually do the tasks, but you sit on the sidelines, you know, encouraging. I first got involved in asset recovery back in mid-90s, I guess, when customer expectation was just get rid of it. And, you know, I worked for a big reseller in the UK, and we would just send trucks in and take old infrastructure and then wave bye-bye. We didn't know where it went or what happened to the data. Mm-hmm. And from those very beginnings, it's now changed significantly. There's far much expectation from certification bodies, because we didn't exist back then, nor did you, mm-hmm. To actually manage this process professionally. But there's far much greater expectation on customers to actually receive benefit from this process. And I think this is where kind of the world of a professional ITAD industry is evolving from. And I agree with that. I don't think ITAD is necessarily the right title per se, but it's what we have at the moment. Within mainland Europe, we see the ITAD sector looks pretty different, I think, than it does in the UK and it does in the States, because ITAD is almost a subset of other businesses' activities. Yes. And so there's lots of organizations who do ITAD, but they're not an ITAD, if that makes sense. And that's the kind of the opportunity, I think, which is to see some of these really smart companies who are doing it, but perhaps on a piecemeal basis, to expand their service offering in this area and to really look at this as a strategic benefit for their organization, rather than simply being, there's a British phrase, Johnny on the spot, where you're just carrying out the transaction because it was required. To see it as part of value that you offer your customers and to drive opportunity forward, because there's no doubt that the tag phrase that we use, which is seize the opportunity or seize the potential of your redundant equipment. Mm-hmm. There's a massive amount of good that redundant equipment can do. There's a massive amount of bad if you get it wrong, of course, but that's where certifications, I think, can help by offering that guiding hand.
Exactly. Well, perhaps the American version of Johnny on the spot is two guys in a truck just to haul your stuff away, and who knows? You know, from there on, it's up in the air. Joe, what do you have to say?
First of all, thank you guys. We have 10 more minutes, but I just wanted to thank you for the reference to the ASCDI ITAD certified program, because I mean it's a beautiful partnership. You guys have great certification programs. What ASCDI piled on top does is make sure that the ITADs are performing as they say. You know, they might be certified, but are they actually performing the services that they've committed to do? So, you know, thank you so much for mentioning that. And also, by the way, Roger, thanks for mentioning Lewis Carroll. I guess that was your reference to the UK.
Well, I'm doing my best here. Yeah, it's early morning here in America, so you know, I know it's after lunch for you guys. So.
That was great. And you know, Steve, you mentioned being part of a community. You know, it's much better, I believe, for our members, for our industry to become certified by one of your companies than it is to allow the regulators to tell us how to run our business. I mean, you guys understand our industry much better than the regulators do. So, you know, for many years before there was you used the certification companies existed, ASCDI, we had our code of ethics, and so we were a self-regulated industry. We didn't government didn't need to regulate our industry because the industry regulated itself. It's gotten a little more complex now, and we need certification companies like yourselves. But much better to join a community, become certified, and tell the regulators this is how the industry does it, rather than letting them tell us how to do it.
I
Steve,
think I agree slightly with that, Joe, as the host. I'm not going to say I disagree entirely. You have to be careful, though, because the law is the law. So an industry can't dictate its, how it interprets the law. It's the regulators that do that. And one of the things, the benefits that you have is that we worked for 2 years with the UK regulator, and we're currently working with the Irish Data Commission at the moment to help them understand our industry so that the law gets interpreted in the way that we want. I was reasonably pleased that Standard 8, that's been officially recognised as a UK GDPR certification scheme, is very, very similar to Standard 7, which meant that the industry was happy because otherwise we wouldn't be very popular. The data impact assurance level concept that we've put in place is exactly the bit that I'm drawing out, which is we had to do it because you couldn't have the industry telling their customers, the data controllers, how they were going to operate. It just wouldn't work. I know that's current practice today.
Sure, but excuse me for interrupting, Steve. But before the regulations become regulations, the regulators, they come to us and they ask us, for your input. How is it done? So you are right. We can influence the regulations before they occur. Once the regulations, we're obligated to abide by them. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Yes, absolutely, Joe.
The other thing, there were ASCI is involved in a project in Sweden called Keep Electronics, having to do with they're building a prototype for the European product passport. We're involved in a similar project here in the U.S. called Obata, doing the same thing using a blockchain and NFT. But how do those regulations that are coming down the pike, what do you see? Is that going to affect your certifications?
It's easy for me to answer that. No, we're just about data. So the provenance of infrastructure is largely out of scope for us. I looked at the blockchain project quite carefully because I was really interested in it because it's quite neat, blockchain. And I'd be interested to see how the tokenization of assets works in the real world, because an asset will get exploded into lots of different components, and therefore the creation of multiple tokens. I think that's a challenge for blockchain to overcome.
Sure. Yeah, let me explain that to the folks. So what the Obata blockchain project is doing is they're going to be creating a non-fungible token for every IT asset. So that's there's only one out there, that there's not a counterfeit, if you will. And then tied to that token is going to be the history of the product. When did it enter the market? When did it was the drives wiped? And what Obata is doing is actually creating a standard by which people with silos of information, the data wiping company, the refurb company, the transportation company, what they can all do is have their own databases, and the standard that Obata is creating will allow them to share whatever information they want to share. They don't want to share the cost. They might want to share but they might be okay sharing the date the product entered the market. And then you tie that into the stuff like Andreas from Inside System was talking about. What's the CO2 savings on this product if you put it back into productive use rather than throwing it in a landfill or building a new one? All that is coming together pretty quickly, I think.
I noticed that RLA is one of your sponsors, Joe, and they're doing a lot of work in this area, both in education and research and trials of implementation of this. Maybe it's America-centric, but the closest I heard as description is this is Carfax for devices. Carfax is an American thing where if you it's a record of a car that's used, and you could see when it's been repaired and what the owners were and things like that. So
Europe has it. I don't know if they call it Carfax, but the same version of the same kind.
Is it, Steve? I don't know what Europe has for that, but the idea of our ERP systems have parent-child relationships when devices are taken apart, and there's other components that then result. I'm not sure how that's being addressed in the Obata system, but that would definitely be a concern. Of you take a hard drive out of a laptop, and then the hard drive is a new asset. Does it have a relationship to the original or not?
Yep. We have about 4 minutes to go of this session. Where do guys start? I'm scared to get certified. It's I hear that it's overpowering. I don't know the first thing. It's expensive. It's time consuming. Where do I start?
My view is 9001. It's mandated within ADISA certification to hold that, and the reason for that is that a lot of the problems that we would see during an initial audit is managed by a successful 9001 implementation. So I also think that's better for the business. They could probably get more business at that internal benefit by seeing some of their systems, which they, 9001 is about their business. It's not an external certification determining how they run their business. It's just them making sure that they control their processes effectively. So I'd always say 9001 is the starting point. But I would then say go for an industry specialist certification, because the external benefit which you receive from there is greater. And as much as the pitch that I'd like to make, I see a bundle of R2 and ADISA ticking all the boxes for the customers. I'm bound to say that, of course, with the data security piece and the compliance piece sitting on that interface and making those problems go away. But the bulk of what you do being managed through best practice via R2.
What do you think, Raj? Where would you suggest starting?
Yeah, similar, but not exact. There's a concept of integrated audit in which new companies, especially to certification, can go through the process of becoming certified to a management system simultaneously with the R2 certification. R2 demands some version of an environmental management system and a health and safety management system for all companies. For those that have test and repair, we also asked for a quality system. And this is either one of the ISO systems, or RIOS, which is mostly America-centric at this point. It's a combination of ISO 14001, 45001, and 9001. But the idea of acquiring those 2 or 3 management standards, or whatever version you have of that, is an excellent foundation. We have a bunch of things on the website for SERI, sustainableelectronics.org, that takes people through the introductory process of saying what is expected, how to prepare, explanatory videos and such. So it's a process. Some companies use consultants. There's a consultant directory on our website. Some do it on their own. It is possible to become certified just with internal resources, again, depending on the size of the company, number of employees, and number of hours you have to spend toward achieving that certification goal.
And speaking of consultants, ASCDI is working with several. We have Reich Sandlin, for example, who does that, who's going to be speaking in a couple sessions from now. So, but we can put you in touch with any consultants if you want, a little bit of hand holding for those first steps. What I really want to do is thank you guys. You guys, this is the second time we've done this now, together. And the way you cooperate and work together, it shows that you're more concerned about our industry, more concerned about the environment, more concerned about data protection than you are about profits. And it's just exemplary. And I just can't thank you guys enough for your time today, but for what you do for our industry.
We are happy to do so. It's a nice collaboration. Getting to know Steve through this process, and seeing the considerable overlap between the two is really significant. I look forward to meeting people, by the way, in the networking session at the end of this thing. It was a lot of fun yesterday, and it's good to keep your questions for there, and look forward to seeing some of you on the one-on-one sessions that are 3 minutes long and extendable if possible.
Roger, thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, guys, you'll see there's a networking button you'll be able to click on at the end of today, which will give you 3 minutes one-on-one with everybody. So it's a real fun thing to do. Steve, closing words.
I wasn't expecting that. I thought we were closing up. I think the bottom line is, for me, I don't think certification is something to be frightened of unless you're really going to embrace it and embed it into your business. When you do that, the benefits that you'll get from a service delivery perspective are significant, but more so from your value proposition to your customer. Yes. I really think it's imperative to view certifications, I'm biased, of course, as something where it adds to the professionalism of the sector, and it adds to the value that we all can offer the customers and help them go on their journey.
Great. Guys, thank you so much. Everybody listening, we're going to sign off for about 30 seconds. We'll be back on with tools for ITAD companies. Thank you all very much. We'll see you in a minute.
Thanks, Joe.